Greetings, it's me, some Asian kid sitting in his bedroom named Jacob Q. Here I am, and welcome to my humble hall. Today, what I will be talking about is Sudan. Sudan is a country that resides in the northeastern part of Africa, and the focus of this video is on Sudan and its history with colonialism. God, that's been specifically in Sudan, where the growing and developed country, Britain, went to Sudan and tried to help the natives by presenting them with resources, technology, and giving them free stuff. Or the British called it gradualism, where they helped natives who think they're incompetent to grow up and be strong, like themselves. So, colonialism that we'll be focusing on is basically Britain coming in, giving the Sudanese people free things, giving them technology, and then they take a little bit of the resources from the native land for themselves. And when they leave, the natives can then self govern. It's all in fine and dandy, but the question becomes, and this question we created ourselves, is did colonialism as a whole benefit Sudan itself in the long run? And I'm going to go into way more depth about what all this means. We think that colonialism was settled in a way that seemed like the British people wanted to benefit Sudan. But actually, the United Kingdom forced the Sudanese people to work in mines and collected a majority of Sudan's resources. And then, after that, they unintentionally split Sudan into two states, which would cause two civil wars and several million deaths. Let's start off with some explanations. The United Kingdom's definition of gradualism, the British people, is something like, I make you better. In exchange, I take some of your resources, and when you're powerful like us, we let you go. Except, it didn't go exactly like that. And I'll lay it out for you in three sections, which I'll put on the screen now. The effects of Sudan economically, the effects on Sudan politically, and the effects on Sudan long term. Each of these events I'm going to link into a certain passage that supports my claim. And don't forget that below, in the comments section, in the description, I will list all of the links that I've used, all the information I've gotten from, and I'll put them in three different sections so you can all review my notes to make sure I'm not BSing. When Great Britain ruled Sudan and joined with Egypt, Great Britain wasn't too keen on sharing the profits with the people of Sudan. In fact, Sudan wasn't really receiving any profits except the greater ways of society. Great Britain simply took the natives and did some underhand trickery and forced them to work on the mines, where they would produce minerals and oils extremely cheaply, and these would be shipped back to the United Kingdoms and be sold for a profit. For these two claims, I have an example, and I will explain it before I move on. Take a look at this picture. This is the Kimberley Diamond Mine in South Africa, and this was operated, and this picture was taken, around the same time as the colonization of Sudan. Take a second to see the quality of the workmen's clothing. Take a moment to see their tired, sweaty bodies, and take a second to see that the only European in the picture, is fully clothed. I'm afraid I couldn't find any specific pictures of Sudan's mines in the same time period, but let us make an inference. If this is what it looked like in the same time, in the same continent, by the same people, then imagine what the mines in Sudan must have looked like. Just about the same, I'd say. These mines were opened by Britain, who in turn took a large percentage of the minerals produced and sold it back to Britain for a lot of profit. And when I said they'd forced the people work in a sort of underhand trickery, here's what I mean. The reason so many people had to work for these mines and farms and whatnot is because Europe began their conquest by flooding the African market with European-made goods, so the African producers couldn't keep up. And then the native businesses would have to close their businesses, and because the goods they made weren't in high enough quantity, weren't in good enough quality to match the European goods, and essentially they had to quit all their businesses and work for mostly white-owned farms and mines to make their income. It was sort of like a double bind. This had an enormous impact on the dependence of the economy. Most Africans became workers than they did business owners, many making the bare minimum amount of money to buy food for them and their families. And most people wanted this to change, so some time will pass when this kind of exploitation will just go on. And when the Sudanese people finally do break free, the people are split into two sides. And one side says we should get back with Great Britain because even though it sucked, even though they exploited us, they knew what they were doing. And the other side said they were exploiting us and we should just be free. And that's that. So this will cause civil unrest, and this will cause different opinions and lack of direction, and the Sudanese people will be completely lost. This split is my next reason why colonialism was detrimental to Sudan in the entirety of the way. The political side of it, next to the economic side. The second section is the effects on Sudan politically. And remember about 2 minutes ago when I said that Great Britain and Egypt ruled Sudan together and they ruled in this thing called a condominium. And this is the joint decision making of a country by two or more foreign countries. These two rulers decided to do things a little differently. Instead of ruling Sudan together as a whole, they split it up into two provinces, northern and southern Sudan, which they would govern by themselves. Egypt taking northern Sudan and Great Britain taking southern Sudan. And this was a huge mistake because when they did this, the two provinces grew up differently. The north became more Arabian and Egyptian, while the south became more Christian and Western. This difference would haunt the country from the moment it became independent to now. The north and south had become a political group with different forms of government due to the ways they were ruled, different religion which came on, and this causes a lot of strife and the effect of confirmation bias, which in short terms means that because there are two groups that disagree, both sides tend to ignore facts that combine them and form opinions about the other side, which dehumanizes the opposing. And for northern Sudan, this is southern Sudan, and for southern Sudan, this is northern Sudan. And these effects occur because Sudan, to begin with, was split into two provinces, which should have never happened to begin with. The occupation of Sudan during colonization really wasn't really negotiated properly to rule it as one, so it had to be split into two. And because of this, the two groups will grow to distrust each other due to the way their lives are different. And because of this, when the colonialists leave there's a long-lasting effect on two sides struggling to coexist, who each want to be dominant. And in review of this colonization, this will lead to the third and final negative effect of colonization, and this is the long lasting effect that comes from splitting up the two provinces and creating two political sides. Long and super complicated story stored. Essentially, after Sudan was officially declared independent, the northern and southern parts of Sudan weren't really combined. And there's an issue that I have to explain. During the final stages of colonization, Britain was shifting their political power to the north because of some economic issues, and because of this, the southern officers felt betrayed and they didn't have a lot of power. So the North were totally dominating in political offices, and they were all cool and stuff. And Southern Sudan was like, well, we want to change. We want to sign a treaty so that we're more like the North and things are more balanced and we're allowed to hold political offices. But while they were doing that, the northern Sudan started flaking and they were reluctant on giving up some of their power, so they were like totally backing out of the deal. And then a civil war happens on two sides. Then this war would span 16 years and cause about 500,000 casualties. And all of this because Northern Sudan didn't want to combine with Southern Sudan and give up some of their political power. And the saddest and most ironic part was when these two sides were writing out the peace negotiations, the entire thing went down and the power was even unevenly distributed. And although the first civil war was officially declared over, it wasn't really over because right after the first civil war ended, a second one started up because the negotiations weren't fair, and it's essentially a continuation on the first civil war. And the more sad part, the even sadder part about this, is that it lasted 22 years with nearly 2.5 million casualties on both sides and 4 million southern Sudanese people displaced. The Second Civil War also partially happened because of resources, but that's not really relevant. It is kind of awfully tragic. These three parts And an economic effect, a political effect, and the long-lasting effect would then devastate the country for half a century. This is an effect of colonization. This is the effect of colonization on Sudan. And at the beginning, the question was, did colonization as a whole benefit Sudan itself in the long run? The answer? No. The colonists disrupted the flow of Sudan. Their presence wasn't for benefit but for their own personal gain. They flooded the country with foreign goods to force native businesses into bankruptcy, and this way they would make more money. They split the combined nation that wasn't even supposed to be a nation into two different ones and governed them differently so that when it came for them to unite, it broke into civil war, and those civil wars would cause the death of millions of people. What we would say is colonization was never supposed to happen. It shouldn't have happened. It unbalanced things, it unsettled things. And because humans are humans, colonization ruptured Sudan, tore it apart. And because of that, it's split into two. The original question: was colonization beneficial to Sudan itself in the long run? And we have to say no. The colonists were never supposed to invade lands that weren't theirs. They were never supposed to own land that wasn't theirs, but they did anyways. And we think, me and Chad, that's not here, think that perhaps if they weren't there, things would have gone wrong as well. But it's purely of an analysis point of view. And we will say that the colonization of Sudan was a mistake. And even today, even half a century or more later, Sudan will still feel the after effects of colonization.